One of Moscow's most important recruitment tools may no longer be in the Kremlin's tool bag. By the way, tool bag is Putin's pet nickname for Dmitry Medvedev. Anyway, those big cash payouts that convinced poor Russians to fight in Ukraine, well, those are now being slashed. I'll tell you how shrinking budgets are exposing more cracks in Putin's war economy, and why fewer rubles could mean fewer soldiers on the front line for the Russian army. For months, Moscow has boasted that its military recruitment drive is stronger than ever, that men across the country are willingly lining up to serve in Ukraine. Okay, but a look at the fine print tells a different story. Across Russia, regional governments are quietly slashing the enlistment bonuses that once fueled their recruitment efforts, signaling that the Kremlin's war machine is beginning to feel the strain of a weakening economy. When the war in Ukraine began, Russia relied heavily on cash incentives to entice volunteers. Signing bonuses were lavish, sometimes several million rubles, equivalent to tens of thousands of US dollars. These payments weren't just tokens of gratitude, they were the foundation of Moscow's recruitment strategy. In many small towns and rural regions, where wages are low and opportunities are limited, the promise of a big payday turned reluctant men into willing soldiers, regardless of the Russian military's meat grinder tactics. But that financial carrot isn't what it used to be. According to reporting from Severil, that's the Russian language branch of Radio Free Europe, at least a half dozen regions across the country have now sharply reduced those one-time payments for signing a military contract. Some have cut them in half. Others, like the Orenburg region, have slashed them down to the legal minimum, about 400,000 rubles, or roughly $4,000. Officials are careful not to say they're running out of money. The official line is that the reductions are due to, quote, fulfilled quotas, that the regions have already met their recruitment targets and no longer need to offer such high bonuses. But economists and local observers are calling that explanation fiction. Russia's war spending has exploded since the invasion began, consuming an estimated 40% of the federal budget. The Kremlin's finances are still propped up by energy exports, but as we've been tracking here on the PDB, sanctions are squeezing hard, and regional budgets, unlike the Kremlin's, don't have endless oil revenues to draw from. Many of these provincial governments have been forced to borrow heavily just to keep up with rising costs and inflation. Maintaining multi-million ruble enlistment payments just isn't sustainable. The Moscow Times reports that Orenburg became the fifth region in October alone to cut its bonus program. Others, including Samara and Bashkortostan, are expected to follow. Together, these regions account for tens of thousands of recruits, proof that this isn't an isolated move, but part of a nationwide pattern. A source quoted by Severil put it bluntly, saying, quote, "The budget is not unlimited." Those words, simple as they are, speak volumes about the state of Russia's wartime economy. It's important to remember how central these bonuses have been to Moscow's mobilization model. Since the beginning of the war, the Kremlin has avoided large-scale conscription drives that could spark domestic backlash. Instead, it's relied on a steady stream of volunteers, lured by high pay, contract benefits, and those hefty signing bonuses. Take away the money, and you take away a major motivator, especially in poorer regions, where economic factors, not patriotism, have been the real driver of enlistment. Radio Free Europe notes that these financial cutbacks reflect not just budget woes, but also shifting manpower priorities. Russia may be trying to consolidate its forces, focusing resources on specialized units rather than throwing money at new recruits. Still, the underlying issue remains the same. A tightening economy is forcing difficult choices. Inflation is rising, industrial production is down, and even Russia's supposedly insulated defense sector is feeling the squeeze. Factories that once ran around the clock are struggling to secure components under sanctions. Meanwhile, the ruble has lost a third of its value against the dollar since the start of the war, eating away at the purchasing power of both ordinary citizens and the state itself. For the men on the ground, that means the financial promise of going to war no longer looks so tempting. A million-ruble bonus once meant a chance to buy a house or pay off debts. A 400,000-ruble check, after inflation and taxes, barely covers a used car. And when weighed against the risk of dying in Ukraine, well, the calculation obviously changes fast. So while the Kremlin continues to project confidence, boasting about its big new weapons tests, its war economy is showing unmistakable cracks. The slashing of enlistment bonuses may seem like a small administrative move, but it reveals a deeper truth. Russia is fighting an expensive war that it can no longer easily afford. All right, coming up after the break, more on Russia's economic turmoil as India, the second largest consumer of Russian oil, backs away from new purchases. Also, the latest on Hurricane Melissa, which has left more than 30 dead as it tears through the Caribbean. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Well, you probably noticed, fall is here. Fancy people call it autumn. Shorter days, colder nights, a fire in the fireplace, hopefully, and that season where families come together around the table for hearty comfort food and good conversation. You know what I'm talking about. Well, that's what Tri-Tail's Premium Beef is all about. Now, this is a terrific company. They're a fifth-generation ranching family out of Texas, still working their land, raising cattle the right way, and producing some of the best steaks and beef you're ever going to taste. And it's all delivered straight to your door. And right now, for the first 30 orders over $499, they're adding a free roast to your shipment. It's a centerpiece meal that can simmer all day and remind you why gathering around the table matters. It's not just beef. It's about building the kind of tradition your family will remember. So head on over to trybeef.com/PDB and claim yours while it lasts. Available for the first 30 orders only. Again, that's trybeef.com/PDB. Welcome back to the PDB. Continuing our theme of Russia's economic troubles, there's fresh evidence that Western sanctions are beginning to bite in one of the few markets still keeping Moscow's war machine afloat. India, Russia's second-largest oil customer behind China, has now paused new purchases of Russian crude, sending a jolt through the Kremlin's most vital source of wartime funding. For much of the past 3 years, India has been one of Moscow's most dependable partners in the oil trade. After Europe began weaning itself off of Russian energy, India stepped in, buying roughly 1.9 million barrels per day and accounting for nearly 40% of Russia's seaborne oil exports. That's according to the International Energy Agency. Those discounted barrels helped to fill India's refineries and Russia's coffers, propping up Moscow's economy even as the war dragged on. But that relationship is now under strain. According to Reuters, several major Indian refiners have halted new orders of Russian crude following the latest round of U.S. sanctions on Moscow's top two exporters. That would be Rosneft and Lukoil. The restrictions don't outlaw Russian oil itself, but they do block transactions with the sanctioned companies and many of their shipping affiliates. The result? Well, the result is a wave of uncertainty. State-run refineries like Bharat Petroleum and Mangalore Refinery and Petrochemicals have suspended new deals while they wait for guidance from the Indian government and their suppliers. One refinery insider told Reuters that his company has already canceled cargoes from traders linked to sanctioned entities. Another said they're hoping to find replacement shipments from non-sanctioned Russian sellers, though those are growing harder to find by the day. Even India's largest refiner, Indian Oil Corporation, which insists it will keep buying Russian crude that, quote, complies with sanctions, has begun seeking alternatives in the spot market. Others, including Reliance Industries, have already turned to Middle Eastern suppliers, ordering more barrels from Iraq and Saudi Arabia. But those alternatives come at a price. American and Iraqi crude, well, is now roughly $3 per barrel more expensive than Russian oil, and that means, of course, higher costs for India's refiners. The impact is also visible at sea. Bloomberg reports that a Russian oil tanker named Furia, loaded with about 730,000 barrels of Rosneft crude and bound for India's Gujarat coast, suddenly turned around in the Baltic Sea after the sanctions were announced. The ship slowed to a crawl and went adrift between Denmark and Germany, unable to find a port that would accept it. European and British authorities have since blacklisted that vessel, a vivid symbol, of course, of how sanctions are freezing Russia's oil logistics mid-route. The ripple effect is enormous. For Russia, India and China are the two remaining pillars of its global oil trade. If even one of those pillars begins to wobble, well, the Kremlin's budgetary math starts to collapse. Oil and gas revenues make up more than a third of Russia's federal income, funding everything from pensions to precision-guided missiles. Every paused shipment, every rerouted tanker, tightens that financial vice. And while India hasn't joined Western sanctions, its refiners are pragmatic. They can't risk secondary penalties from Washington or disrupted shipments that could leave their facilities idle. Okay, moving now to the Caribbean and Hurricane Melissa. one of the most powerful Atlantic storms in modern history, made its third and final landfall in the Bahamas, battering the islands now with just the strength of a high Category 2 or a low Category 3 hurricane. The National Hurricane Center said rainfall totals will reach up to 10 inches across the southeastern Bahamas, which has already triggered flash floods in several low-lying communities. Forecasters warn the danger is not over, with even more flooding and coastal inundation expected through this afternoon as Melissa's massive wind field continues to churn northward. Hurricane Melissa's initial 892 millibar central pressure at landfall in Jamaica now ties the 1935 Labor Day hurricane as the lowest ever recorded in the Atlantic, in an unmistakable sign of extreme intensity. As we discussed earlier this week, in simple terms, millibars measure atmospheric pressure, and when that pressure drops this low, it means the air is collapsing inward, fueling even stronger winds. For comparison, most major hurricanes form around 950 millibars. I'll bet you had no idea that I was a part-time meteorologist. The Cat 5 storm's destructive march began on Tuesday when it slammed into Jamaica, making landfall some 60 miles west of the capital, Kingston. The storm hit land with sustained winds topping 180 miles per hour, knocking out power to nearly the entire island and crippling public infrastructure. By early Wednesday, Melissa hit southeast Cuba as a Category 3 hurricane, its second landfall in less than 24 hours. Cuba's government said rising rivers had cut off access to roughly 140,000 people as floodwaters swept through mountain towns and coastal villages. Meteorologists say Cuba's rugged terrain briefly disrupted Melissa's eye, but also forced its winds to fan outward, expanding the storm's reach across the Caribbean. As recovery efforts now stretch across the region, the death toll has climbed sharply, with at least 28 people in Haiti dying after rivers overflowed their banks, 3 in Jamaica during storm preparations, and another in the Dominican Republic. I'd like to point out that Jamaican officials say the full number of victims remains unclear as of now, with several communities still cut off by landslides and floodwaters. The U.S. State Department said it deployed a regional disaster response team and activated urban search and rescue units to assist with recovery efforts across the Caribbean. President Trump announced that Washington is prepared to support Jamaica's rebuilding, while the UK has pledged more than $3 million in humanitarian aid to the storm-stricken islands. Now, Melissa is racing north, expected to pass west of Bermuda late tonight, where a hurricane watch is already in effect. Meteorologists continue to assure residents of the southern and eastern United States that the storm will not make landfall. Still, the National Hurricane Center warns that Hurricane Melissa's moisture will feed another system expected to lash the mid-Atlantic and New England with heavy rain, strong winds, and coastal flooding into Friday. By the weekend, Melissa should skim past Newfoundland, Canada, before being torn apart by the jet stream, ending several days of destruction across the Caribbean basin. All right, up next in today's Back of the Brief, a deadly showdown in Brazil. A sweeping police raid on Rio's drug gangs leaves more than 60 people dead in what officials call the most violent operation the city has ever seen. I'll have those details when we come back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me take just a moment to talk about personal finances. And let me start with a question. Do you owe $10,000 or more in credit card debt or personal loans? Well, with credit card debt at all-time highs, Debt Relief Advocates is urgently notifying consumers of debt relief now being made available, and that's designed to aid consumers with out-of-control credit card debt. Those who qualify and enroll for this relief program may only have to pay back a fraction of what they owe. Look, it's not bankruptcy or a debt consolidation loan. This is a relief program that credit card companies, frankly, would rather you not know about. It could end your debt troubles and could save you a lot of money. Consumers owing at least $10,000 in credit card debt or personal loans can now take advantage of this debt relief as the cost of living continues to rise. To learn what debt reduction you may qualify for, simply go online and visit DRA.com. That's DRA.com. Again, DRA.com. Debt Relief Advocates. In today's Back of the Brief, the streets of Rio de Janeiro looked like a war zone earlier this week as massive police raids unfolded into the deadliest anti-drug operation in the city's history, leaving at least 64 dead, 4 of them police officers. The pre-dawn assault targeted the Red Command. That's a gang deeply entrenched in some of Rio's poorest neighborhoods. The gang was founded in the 1970s in Rio's high-security prisons to run cocaine and marijuana across the continent, while utilizing paramilitary-style fighting to control local black markets. More than 2,500 officers took part in the operation, which took 2 months of planning and a year-long investigation, all building to one day meant to weaken the gang's hold over the city. As daylight broke, the scale of the chaos became clear. Thick smoke rolled over the skyline as gang members set fires, torched buses, and tried to block police from further advancing into neighborhoods. Images on Brazilian television showed plumes of smoke rising above cinder-block homes as the raid pushed through the city's north. As a result, major roads were shut down, including one leading to Rio's International Airport. University classes were canceled, transit came to a halt, and for much of the morning, parts of Rio looked like a city at war. Governor Claudio Castro called it, quote, a state operation against narco-terrorists, part of what he described as an all-out war on organized crime. He said Rio had no choice. These are criminal groups, he said, that outgun local police and terrorize entire communities. His words echoed a familiar message from Washington, where President Trump's anti-narco-terrorism campaign has pushed Latin American allies to treat cartels like insurgent armies, not just criminals. Still, the Operation Death Toll shocked even veteran officers. The toll surpassed Rio's previous deadliest raid in 2021, also against the Red Command gang, when 28 people were killed, including one officer. This time, 60 of those killed were believed to be tied to the gang, though government officials admitted some may have been civilians caught in the crossfire. Police say it's the unfortunate price of confronting gangs that use crowded neighborhoods as human shields. By nightfall, Governor Castro turned his attention to Brasilia, blaming President Lula da Silva's socialist government for refusing to send reinforcements to aid local police. Castro said, quote, Rio needs support to combat these heavily armed groups. But Lula's justice minister quickly fired back, pointing to nearly a dozen joint anti-crime operations over the past 2 years in Rio de Janeiro. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Thursday, the 30th of October. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. Now, if you enjoy the PDB, and I certainly hope that you do, remember to check out and hopefully subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's at President's Daily Brief. And it's a humdinger, as the kids say nowadays. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.